everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about tips for designing remote-ready syllabi for our uncertain future that's ahead of us in the fall semester. Today we're joined by Dr. Jose Vasquez, who's an economics instructor at University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana and is one of the most incredible instructors I've ever worked with, and Dr. Adam Fein, who's the Vice President of Digital Strategy and Innovation at University of North Texas, whose career has taken him through many institutions and is an absolutely wonderful member of all the institutions he's been a part of. We're very excited to have them both here today. I've had the opportunity to know both Adam and Jose for several years now, so it's really exciting to be able to bring them both here together for this discussion. Together, they represent multiple decades of experience building out and refining online classes. So both of their experiences today will help us for the fall semester, regardless of whether we will be fully online or preparing for a scenario where we might be online in the fall. And my name is Jessica Tenuta. I'm PacBack's Chief Product Officer, and I lead our product and engineering development at PacBack. So I wanted to start with introductions because both of you have such fascinating backgrounds and have so much to share and context around what you've learned over the years. So Adam, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background and what about your history in the education world has given you a unique perspective on building resilient courses?
Well, thank you, Jessica. I appreciate it. First of all, thank you for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here today with all of you, and to get to hang out with Jose again is a true honor. One of my favorites out there in the world of higher education and trying to do some things that help people with digital technology. So I was fortunate enough to spend the first part of my career at the University of Illinois, first 17 years in academia. My degrees are from there. And I've also spent a little bit of time in the corporate sector. I worked for Quaker Oats, Pepsi, and Gatorade doing the early days of kind of web-based, computer-based training. Lots of cool things happened at Illinois, lots of things that took a lot of work from a lot of people. I think one of the best things I was involved with was being a part of launching the first MOOC-based degree with Coursera, so the IMBA, which now is, I think, the second largest online program in the world. I was over 3,000 students there to Georgia Tech's awesome data science degree. I've continued my work with Coursera at the University of North Texas and just launched what is their first U.S. bachelor's degree. It's a bachelor's completion degree in the effort to try to start to reverse the horrible number of 36 million Americans, and that's just in America, who have started college and haven't finished. And we're really excited about the interest for that program so far. So I've been at North Texas for about a year and a half now. It's been wonderful, and glad to be here today.
Awesome. Welcome, Adam. And Jose, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself. And first, I want to share my experience with Jose has been incredible, getting to watch the way that he develops his classes. He has experience in teaching face-to-face classes of over 900 students, online classes, hybrid classes, and is just one of the most innovative instructors I've ever had a chance to work with. So, Jose, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background and your research and why that shaped your perspective on resilient courses?
Thank you. And so actually, the first thing I wanted to do is to kind of caution everyone that I'm here with my daughter who's in the room, and there are two dogs too somewhere around there. So just in case I get interrupted. And I was telling Jess and Adam before we started the call, a lot of my approach to teaching, and I think some of the reasons why some of my work has been interesting to people is because my approach is very similar to the approach I take on parenting. It's a very practical approach, and that's why I was one of the, since I first started teaching, I decided to teach my course in a hybrid mode when I use a lot of online technologies in order to scale some of my ideas, and that's kind of partly what it was really easy to do when I went to the University of Illinois, where I've been since 2004. I've been teaching a very large course, like Jess said, for a long time there, and I was one of the first people that were approached to try to start, experimenting with online delivery of the same course, not only to our students but to the audience in general. My course was one of the first two courses that we put in Coursera. It's been there since 2012. and the number of people that register have been incredible, and the exposure that it has given art teaching is amazing. In addition, it has allowed me to experiment, which is, like just one of the things I like the most in the online world. And a lot of the things I learned, I transfer to all the different modalities. So a lot of my work has been interested because it's very practical in that sense. In terms of my scholarship, I have been very interested in the last 10 years on cognitive load theory and mental attention, and in relation to motivation, particularly curiosity. And that's what I've been working the last 5 years.
Wonderful. Welcome, Jose. We're so happy to have you here today. And as I said, my name is Jessica. I am the Chief Product Officer at PackBack. And for those in the audience who have not heard of PackBack before, we are inquiry-based online discussion powered by AI to help instructors spend more time engaging with their students and interacting, and less time moderating the discussion. So at the very end of the webinar, we'll talk a little bit more about what PackBack is. But just for some context on our experience, we've been used by almost 500,000 students to date in the last 5 years, which is an exciting milestone. And it's given us a lot of learnings about what works well in classrooms to help students stay engaged in all sorts of settings, from online, in-person, and hybrid. I also want to introduce 3 other special ladies from our team who are currently in the chat. Ishani and Aryam are members of our experience management team. They'll be chatting in response to any members of the audience who are asking questions. And then Mahedi, who's a member of our strategy team, who works with our professors who want to learn more about PackBack. So she'll be chiming in throughout the webinar at the end as well, in case you'd like to learn more about PackBack. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to leave them in the attendee chat. We'll be happy to answer them there. So as we get started today, I really wanted to start first with a quick overview of what do we mean by resilient course design, right? We put this out in the title of the webinar. What do we actually mean by a resilient course? And the metaphor that I find to be most helpful here is thinking about if you've ever engaged with a website online on your computer, and then you go and access it on your tablet or your phone, and you see that it adapts to the screen size that you're on, that website is responsive. And what we're aiming for with a resilient course is similar to a responsive website. Even as the content shifts across different formats, or even as the method of how you're accessing that content changes, no critical content is ever lost. So when we're thinking about building a resilient course, we're prioritizing essential objectives being accomplished over having rigid structure or rigid control. And what we sacrifice in that control, instructors and students can gain in confidence and continuity of content, right? So even if we head into the fall semester, not yet certain if we will be fully online, partially online, or dealing with cases where our courses might be face-to-face, but our students are dealing with situations that cause them to be remote more often than not, we will still be able to have confidence that the students are not losing any critical objectives of the course. So that's what we're aiming for, and that's what we mean by resilient course design. And with that, we'll jump into our 3 pillars that we're going to be discussing today, with the first being identifying the essential objectives of your course and then building back up from those essentials. One of the things that we've been hearing from our instructors across the country who we're working with is just the stress of what has happened this term, of transferring courses that were meant to be face-to-face to online. And what that's led to is a lot of instructors who are feeling constrained for time and feeling like there's not a lot of flexibility to be able to relate past content to the current application method. So a way to help mitigate that when we don't know exactly what our summer and fall terms will look like is starting by identifying what is truly essential in the course. And we recommend starting with a couple of questions to help guide that exercise. If your department gives mandatory guidance around what learning objectives should be achieved in a course, it's a great place to start. But if they don't, what do you as the instructor of the course believe are the most critical things for a student to gain from the course? There is so much that is covered in the scope of a semester, but there are a few key elements that I know when we talk to any individual instructor come to mind for them when they think, I would be successful if my student leaves with these 3 learnings or these 3 applicable takeaways. And we found that it can be very helpful to try this exercise shown on the right here of it's much harder to take a fully finished course and figure out what small pieces to pull out because everything is so interconnected. But if you instead start by this kind of thought exercise, if I were to put everything out onto the lawn from this course, what would I choose to bring back inside? It can be easier to think from that most stripped down scenario and building back up from the essentials than the other way. And as you think about what the most important essential objectives of your course are, We recommend then grading all of your past assignments on the following criteria. Is this truly the most high impact activity to deliver on those critical learning objectives? Does this depend on any particular delivery method? And really kind of the flip side of that question is, does this allow me to take advantage of the unique abilities that the digital medium provides me? And what is really the right tool for the job? And that could be a whole separate webinar on its own, looking at accessibility, cost, access. And I think we'll get into that a bit throughout this webinar. But these are questions that can help guide that thought process of understanding what is the most important way that I can deliver on those essentials. And with that, I'd love to pose a question to Dr. Vasquez, who, as I mentioned at the beginning, has taught for 20 years, face-to-face, extremely large lecture halls, basically every possible challenging situation you could imagine for teaching, and he has just excelled in every one. He has a lot of learnings to share about his time teaching over those 20 years and how he's refined his approach to online. So would you mind sharing a little bit about your philosophy for building courses that translate well, regardless of delivery method?
Sure. So rather than telling you about my specific teaching philosophy, it will take me a little bit, and I think I might have a chance to do it later on in the webinar. Let me just say that I think my teaching philosophy transferred completely across delivery methods. Like, in other words, after teaching online for 20 years, I believe I can achieve the same in any modality. Now, but it took a while for me to come to that answer. In fact, even the first 5 years of teaching online, I don't think I would have actually given that answer. And I think the reason it took me so long is because it took me a long time to realize that what I needed to transfer was exactly that, the philosophy, the goals, and not the teaching methods I was using. And I think it's something very hard for anyone to do, to change, right? So my initial reaction to actually start teaching online was to transfer the methods I was using to teach face-to-face to the online environment. And that was, that didn't work very well. And so it was a profound revelation for me that really impacted a lot of my teaching online. And it goes a long way for anyone to actually believe that. Now, once you believe that once you you try to achieve that, transfer the philosophy, the goals, rather than the methods, then I think you have a pretty good shot. For instance, and let me give you an example, a practical example of that. And I know this is going to sound controversial, but I would say that after a very small investment in a technology such as Zoom, there is a negative correlation between the amount of time an instructor spends using Zoom and the success of the online class. In other words, if the first thing an instructor does to teach a class online is to spend a lot of time in Zoom, I think the online class is not going to be very effective. And Zoom is not the low-hanging fruit for online courses of Zoom-like technology. And I know this is controversial because since the beginning of the race to transfer online, since COVID, administrators have been using the fact that they have to Zoom license as an evidence that they provide full quality education online. And I think using mostly Zoom to convert a face-to-face course online, I think it's an example of an attempt to transfer the teaching method, the synchronous lecture, rather than the goal online. And I know this is since it's a controversial. Let me further explain that with an example. Suppose Bob Dylan wakes up one day and realizes that the venue he was going to be giving a concert is not available. Would he actually choose to do the concert on Zoom? And that would be ridiculous. Right? He would never expect that to replace the concert, and no fan that was thinking of going to the concert will ever think that a Zoom concert is the same as a concert. Now, that doesn't mean that recordings of Bob Dylan are actually very good on their own. They just don't happen to be one-to-one substitute. So what we have to do, hence, is not to try to transfer the synchronous lecture, but to try to use the benefits we get from online technologies that are difficult to get in a face-to-face class. Here's a kind of a good guideline. I think anyone trying to convert their courses online now for the first time, I think every time they sit down to work on that process, they should ask themselves one question. Will I be able to use this when I go back to teach online, face-to-face? And if the answer to that is no, I think there's high likelihood that they should not be doing that to teach online in the first place. Right? I think if the answer is yes, that they will be able to use this later on in their face-to-face course, then it's a very good indication that is a right way to go in teaching their online class.
That
Obviously, this has to do with my teaching philosophy, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah, that high transferability of an activity, making it medium agnostic, right? Can I take this plan for this class and only gain further benefits from each of the mediums that I'm delivering it through, whether it's digital or in person, without losing anything? I think is a great way to think about that problem. And I'll probably bounce back and forth between both of you, but that was such a great transition into the next question for Adam. When you think about the benefits of digital first course design, what are some of the things that you've seen that can actually improve student and instructor experience, or what is unique about digital first delivery?
Sure, I'm happy to answer that question. I first want to say this is why I love hanging out with Jose. We always agree to disagree and have different philosophies. And actually, we wound up talking about this a little bit last week because what I said to Jose was, well, let's not throw out all synchronous communication. You know that there's some real benefits, including removing isolation and things for students is really important during this time. And we agreed on that, of course. But I do agree with Jose. You don't necessarily just want to transport your 90-minute lecture to Zoom. And I would even say you better be a really good orator, like Jose is, if you're even still doing a 90-minute lecture and face to face. And some people are really talented at that. I'm not anti-lecture, but we do know that chunking and cutting things up can be very effective by topic. Certainly a better way to go online. So I think it's important to sprinkle in synchronous opportunities when you can. And something as simple as virtual office hours can have a huge impact. And then I want to say also, before I mention digital first, I think, I'm fortunate enough to have an amazing student innovation advisory board that I meet with every month, because if I don't know what's working, what's not working for our students, then I don't feel like I can be an effective administrator. So we talk a lot about this, and we certainly talked through this first couple months of COVID, which were the last couple months of the semester. And sometimes it's just being simple. I think ensuring the need to know over the nice to know. Jessica, you framed that really well. But I don't want to skate over just the clarification of expectations and ease of navigation. The one thing all of my students said were, it's so nice in these courses over here where I can see my assignments and my due dates. And in these courses, I could not, or it was hard to find. That seems like a really simple thing, but it means so much to students. So we're really emphasizing that going as we went into the summer and into the fall, planning for fall in whatever blended scenario that might look like, because we're going to have a whole lot more online, and we need to, we're continuing to working with faculty, and I've taught a graduate course online as well, but that's a really, really important aspect of this. So. But what about unique benefits of digital course design that can improve student and instructor experience? That's a great question. So for that, I want to harken back a little bit to some of the research that I've done. I study the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, and I've been fortunate enough to work with Jose on some of this research. So one of the interesting things that we actually found a few years ago when we were working on this together at Illinois was that instant elaboration feedback, particularly in the form of multimedia, can be very, very effective in helping people master a topic that they may not have mastered. So, for example, in this case, if you're taking a quiz and you miss a question, you're going to immediately get a treatment that tells you about the topic that you missed. And we've seen that be very effective to get a text-based version of that, but even more effective, up to 5 times more effective, if you get a short video treatment, multimedia treatment, talking about the topic. Now, if you can imagine that actually can't really happen face-to-face. You can't be sitting in a classroom and all of a sudden in front of your desk, there pops up a video customized just for you about what you just missed. It would disturb everybody in the class and vice versa. So there are some real benefits to thinking about design in some of the, both in the multimedia area and also in the area of personalized feedback, particularly elaboration feedback. So not verification feedback, not just, hey, you're correct or incorrect, but elaborating on the topic that wasn't fully understood. So those are just a couple things. If I might, Jessica, too, I'll just a quick mention here of Packback as well, because we've had some really interesting studies recently using Packback in our courses too, because one of the things we're grappling with even before COVID, and I'm sure many folks on this webinar have been thinking about this too, is, how do we continue to have really high quality online learning with high enrollment? And so this is why we were really intrigued at Illinois and now at the University of North Texas about testing and trying different things with Packback. So two really quick things that we found that I think are really pretty great early findings. Number one, that 44% of the posts in Packback versus we did an A/B test with that in Canvas. 44% contained citations versus 14% in Canvas. So that's a quality measure. So we're looking at quality of submission. So the quality of the submissions went up using Packback. That's great. And then the other piece is I would call it the prioritization of high utility tasks. So if the instructors and TAs in these 100, 200, 500 person courses can't, it's very difficult to spend time grading each post, and even if you can do that, if you can spend less time on the repetitive rote things and more time coaching your students because that's taken care of by the AI, we actually are seeing significant findings there as far as the students doing better in the class because they get more coaching because their TAs and instructors aren't spending all the time on that. So just a couple things that I think are unique to the digital space there.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And I think the kind of exciting takeaways so far are for the folks that are in our attendee chat right now, thinking about what they can take away from this for the fall semester is looking at almost assuming that we will be digital, thinking digital first, making sure that the content is transferable regardless of the medium that we deliver it in, to both Adam's point here on what we can then potentially gain from a digital first course design, and to Jose's point about thinking about making sure that we're not fully investing in just transferring the teaching method from face-to-face to online and instead focusing on the key objectives of the class. I think both of those things are a great place to start when designing the course for the fall semester. And Jose, I wanted to resurface one thing that I know we talked about in prep that I think is relevant here before we move on to the next section. The research you've been doing recently around Bloom's 2 Sigma problem and around the way that you are dripping out content for the students and allowing them to focus on mastery learning. How are you thinking about that as it relates to resilient courses for the fall and a digital first approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's very related to what, it's kind of a complete follow-up to what Adam was saying in describing his research and kind of some of the stuff we did in Illinois and he's continued to do in Texas, which is this idea of feedback that the students get when he tries a question and the opportunity to get that feedback, right? I mean, when I think about teaching and one of the things I have to accomplish, and this goes back to my teaching philosophy, one of the things I need to accomplish is to provide an environment in which students can fall safely, because learning is a process of correcting yourself after you fall, right? If I'm teaching Mara how to ride a bike, one of the things I need to be able to do is, she needs to ride the bike, obviously. If I show her the PowerPoint presentation, she's not going to get it. But she also, she's going to learn when she gets up from falling and then correct herself. So the falling is an integral part of the process. If I deny her that process, she won't be able to learn. So if we deny the students the opportunity to receive feedback and to integrate that feedback into further attempts, then we actually are creating an environment for learning. And this is something that, surprisingly, when I started thinking about this, I found out that this is something like Bloom had actually discovered back in the 1950s and 60s when he did studies on different methods of instruction. And one of the first experiments he did was to compare, well, how much better a student will learn if instead of doing the traditional, you come to class, I give you a lecture, you come in 2 months, a week later, or 2 weeks later, and you get an exam. If we compare the student receiving instruction in that way versus a student coming to the office hours on a one-to-one basis. And he found out that students coming to office hours on a one-to-one basis were doing 2 sigma, 2 standard deviations better than the students receiving instructions, regardless of any other characteristics. And this is one of the evidence that he cited to suggest that the traditional bell curve that we have been using at that point really was not it's an evidence of our inability to teach all students. That essentially all students should be able to learn, provided that they have the time to learn and to practice. And later he found out, in the experiment he did, is that if you do the intermediate process, which is a process that Adam described, which is the machine or someone give you feedback. In the case of Bloom, it was before the machine. It's like you do a problem, you don't come to office hours, but you receive feedback, you get to try it again, you submit it, you receive feedback, you get to try it again. That is what he called mastery learning. And that process is an intermediate between office hours and traditional instruction. And those students were doing at least 1 standard deviation better than the students actually in the traditional classroom. And Bloom said that, at the time, we didn't have the technology to really scale that mastery learning, but now we do. And this is the benefit of online, right? I would say that one of the most essential benefits you get from an online environment is that the machine provides the opportunity for students to do mastery learning, to try something, turn it in, get feedback, turn it in again. And this could be programmed with some degree of high fixed costs, but one time, but after that, you can reap those benefits over a long period of time. So I believe that in order to succeed online, one of the best approaches is the approach of mastery learning, which is a complete opposite of the approach we would use in a traditional classroom, where we have to give students exams as the main way of assessing them.
Yeah, and I think that is a great transition to our second pillar that we're going to talk about here. I think even us being on this webinar all here together today, becoming masters of Zoom and masters of this tool that we're using, any meeting to join for a webinar, the communication that can happen in a digital first or remote setting is very different than what happens when you have someone face to face. All the cues that are lost, all compared with all the things that we gain by being able to have the continuous feedback and the continuous interaction that digital provides. So with that, there are some very concrete challenges that are presented in a classroom setting between the instructor communicating to their students and their students communicating back to their instructor, and some tips that we'd recommend for how to mitigate that challenge. And the way that we like to summarize this is asking, does your communication to your students pass the stress test? And what I mean by that is, can your students remember the deadlines and requirements without having to reference back to documentation and syllabi and reference back to the LMS to remind themselves? Because the stress that the students are under is going to be much higher in this fall semester. Even if things are somewhat back to normal, there will be new circumstances that they are dealing with, and the remote and digital consumption of classes tends to be a bit more challenging for students to keep everything straight that they are trying to complete for their classes. So when you're thinking about communicating with your students, asking, can my students track my progress at any given time? Is there a clear way that they can see how they're doing? To Jose's point around mastery learning, that feedback of how someone is doing is critical to them actually being able to iterate on how they're performing. Second, are your deadlines clear and consistent? If at all possible, keeping extreme simplicity in the due dates and deadlines and requirements so that students can focus on completing the work as opposed to on remembering and balancing the deadlines. And then finally, and probably the most important piece here, and this holds true also for work environments. We're holding ourselves to this within our own work environment at PackBack. I'm sure you both are experiencing the same thing. In a digital setting for communication, more communication is better when we are repeatedly communicating the most important things. So less communication of the unimportant, more communication of the very important, maybe more than you even think that you need, and focusing on using public communication for all those interactions whenever possible. Because instead of just a single person benefiting from your feedback, then all the students in the class are able to read and remind themselves of the answer that you gave to a single student. The LMS is a great place to post that kind of public communication, tools like Packback as well, but really thinking about, can this be sent out to every student in one consistent way? A side benefit for that is the time savings for the instructor as well. So instead of trying to, and I'm sure folks in the audience here might be experiencing this, of the deluge of emails coming in as students are trying to adapt to this new environment, a way to help mitigate that is extreme public communication. So with that, I know Adam and I have been talking in prep for this webinar around some of the things he's been hearing from his students at University of North Texas around the challenges that students specifically experience when they first transition into online. Can you tell us a little bit about those communication challenges that you've observed in online settings and how instructors can help to mitigate?
Sure. And I almost don't want to say too much here because I want people to. It's wonderful to just listen to what Jess just shared. Simplicity is so important, and when we had to. So University of North Texas, for those of you who aren't unfamiliar, we're the 27th largest university in the country. A lot of people are surprised by that. We have almost 40,000 students. And so I've been at Illinois with 49,000. So big public universities. We had to move almost 8,000 courses to remote, as quickly as all of you did. It was a challenge, and I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about here. But what we created this site called, Teach Anywhere and Learn Anywhere for the students. And the big key was keeping it simple. There was a lot of people who wanted to post a whole bunch of information, tips and top 10 and top 5. We put some of those on there, but we really wanted to keep it simple. And I think that's so important for design. And the biggest challenges, as I mentioned before, were from the students who couldn't find what they were looking for, just the basics. And I wrote down here in my notes, calendar and due dates, like I said, communication expectations. Don't tell your students you're going to talk to them every day if you can't, but don't probably tell them, I'll check in every month. That's not going to work either, particularly because we're always trying to fight against isolation. That's not what is needed in online, and it's not what we should be doing. So I think you're limiting uncertainty then, and then everybody can have a lot better experience. And so I just want to overemphasize that simplicity in everything you do.
It almost seems like an important measure for instructors who are experiencing this to keep in mind is thinking about what percentage of your communication with your students is having to be resetting expectations and what percent is allowing you to engage meaningfully with them as individuals. If you're having to engage multiple times over to set the same expectations, it might be an opportunity to share that publicly and then think about how you can reserve some of that time for those one-to-one interactions whenever possible. And just an informal follow-up, I don't have a slide for it, but Jose, with your experience both in online and teaching very large classes, how do you typically manage just the scale of communication that you're dealing with? How do you think about bringing efficiencies into communication at scale?
Well, there's a couple of ways. I mean, obviously, one of them we usually have a lot of information about, which is discussion, discussion forums, listserv, and mailing lists. Packback is a fantastic tool to use AI to manage discussions. So I use all that, but it's also about trying to think about ways of using once you go online to do things differently. Here's a basic tip that I could give everyone when they move from face-to-face to online. You replace your hard deadlines. The exam is on this day. You have to turn in the assignment by this day. You replace that with guidelines. You tell us you should turn in by this day. And the benefit of that is that the good students, the students who probably don't need a lot of your help, they will follow the guidelines. And the students who need who may need your help are probably going to procrastinate. So automatically, your students themselves are actually indicating to you which are the ones that need your help. And you can focus now on those students that need your help. It's a very easy way to identify students who need your help and to manage a large number of students. So now, if I was teaching 900 students, 200 of them already told me that they're kind of okay on their own. And now I have another ones that I can kind of manage and provide things in a more customized way. Then after that, what I do is, my Zoom office hours are on demand. Throughout the week, from 8 to 4, I have one person on demand that actually provides Zoom office hours, and then I contact the students who are falling behind and nudge them to come to office hours and use the resources we have for them. So this is something, like Adam said, this is something that is hard to do face to face, but it's very easy to do online. And it's a very simple way of, doesn't require a lot of change in our teaching to actually capitalize on those benefits.
Yeah, I think you touched on something really interesting there, not just in the flexibility and the simplicity of the deadlines, but the other benefit to those flexible deadlines or guidepost deadlines is giving the students autonomy and choice, right? Obviously, they are being recommended to complete their assignments at those times, but that does start to tap into their ability to have more autonomy, which can be a support to student motivation overall. Obviously, it would require close monitoring and intervention. It runs the risk of students potentially going off track, so it doesn't mean that we don't monitor it anymore, but having that choice and flexibility can help with some of the other challenges that come about in online.
Right, and let me just say one more thing, because so I kind of touched over Packback in general, but I think it's a great example now, right? So I've been using Packback for about 5 years, and one of the methods that Packback uses, which is completely in line with the philosophy I was describing on mastery, is that when the students don't meet the requirement, a posting of the students don't meet the requirements, you identify the posting, you send the student an email, and you tell them you have to repost in order to get the credit, right? So it's mastery, right? In the 5 years I have been teaching, many students have gotten all these emails. I have yet one, maybe not even, I think definitely not even more than one student who sent me an email back to me complaining that they did not want to do the revision. So students are more than happy to revise their work as long as you get them opportunity to do that. They're a lot happier revising their work than they are about being surprised about their grade.
Yeah, so I think the most important takeaway of this section is really communicate more than we think is necessary on the most important pieces, simplicity, and try to remove the unessential in our communication. And on that note, continuing the conversation around communication online, the third pillar that we'll discuss today is around building community around the course that is medium agnostic. And I put that in italics and stress this because the thing that was most challenging among many of the challenging things that happened this semester was instructors suddenly finding themselves without a tangible way to keep their students connected with each other and with their classmates. So building around the assumption that we may not have a reliable face-to-face experience in the fall, thinking about how do we build in community that can respond to that and be resilient through that. And here, I am not going to share specific recommendations because I think there's a lot of ways to approach this, but I am going to share some of the studies that are most relevant to why this is so important and why we're stressing this so deeply. We have seen a lagging online completion rate. I think this is well known. There's a number of studies that support this, but there's a very interesting study here, which I've referenced, and I will share and follow up with the slides around one of the predictive factors of looking at it if an online course is going to be successful is if there was an effective online community around the course for the students to engage with each other. That social presence that the students have, that opportunity to engage with the course content in a social environment has been shown to be helpful to maintaining a much more successful completion rate in online classes. And when you have an effective community, that effective community can lead to overall course improvements. So this was a study performed at Stanford by Bettinger and his peers around exposure to engaged peers causing the other peers in the class to perform better. So not just if the student was engaged themselves, but if they were exposed to and named by or nominated by engaged peers, that led to better improvements from the student who was nominated by their peers. And the effect is even greater for marginalized students in that study. So that's a really interesting one, and I would certainly recommend checking it out. And then the final piece is we're talking a lot about how do we keep students engaged, how do we make sure that they make it through to the end of the class, but also talking about how community can serve cognitive goals. I think Garrison's practical inquiry model, which is a part of his communities of inquiry model, which recommends a interaction model for designing online discussion or online communities in a computer mediated space, is very helpful for this, looking at the cognitive processes that are engaged when a student has to ask their own open-ended inquiry. And I will ask a question to Jose right after this around some of the research he's been doing, but I wanted to first just frame up a more broad question to Dr. Vasquez around what have you seen work to maintain engagement and community in very large or online or difficult teaching environments like you've had to learn how to master?
Yeah, that's a very good question. over a long period of time, obviously breaking any major task into small segments that the students can achieve and that are more manageable is definitely the way to go. So, this means there's always an argument to cut the number of questions you ask, broad questions you ask in the class, and to allow students to work on one question for a long period of time. uh, One kind of big question is probably more effective than you are going to give students a number of questions and they don't have enough time to work on them. That is definitely in terms of motivation a lot more effective. In terms of the idea of building community, the other part that is I think what Jess was alluding. So one of the things I wanted to study when I started this backpack was whether it made a difference as to who's asking the question in the Packback platform. Does it make a difference if the students ask questions, or is it better when I ask questions? Obviously, there's an argument to be made that it might be better if I ask the questions. I have knowledge of the field, or I'm a master on the topic, and I have experience, so I may have better questions than the students do. And one of the things we found out after that is that it actually doesn't matter so much at the end of the course. We did a research and we divided students randomly and we put them into groups. In one group, it was only me, the one asking questions, and in the other group, I wasn't asking questions, it was just the students. And what we found out is at the end of the semester, in terms of learning and motivation, it didn't make a difference. In other words, the group in which the students were asking questions, they started slow, but after 4 or 5 weeks, they were pretty good at asking good questions, and they were actually enjoying and benefiting from those questions as much as the questions that I provided myself. And I think what I get from that is that the process of the students working in a community on their own is what matters the most, regardless of, let's say, where the content really comes from. So I think one of the best way I definitely agree with some of the research that you were pointing out before about the power of the students themselves creating a lot of their learning. We already know that from research on motivation that autonomy is a big determinant of whether someone wants to learn on their own because they think it's good for themselves, not because they get a certain number of points from working on it.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on something that has really stuck out to me as I've been also digging in deeper and deeper into interaction models around discussion. It's just some of the counterintuitive findings that are true in an online environment, right? Kind of the assumptions that we might hold of more time or more feedback or more interaction is always better isn't actually proving to be the case if we are then having that come at the cost of the students asking their own questions, engaging with each other, taking a cognitive and teaching presence in their community. So just as a follow-up to that, Adam, just on that topic of kind of the unexpected findings of online, I know this one's kind of just off the cuff, but have you come across any research that is counterintuitive or surprising to you that is different than what you might have expected from what has worked well in face-to-face classes when you think about what works well online?
Well, that's a great question. I think a few different things. One, we looked at, so after the study that I mentioned before, where we saw some real gains using multimedia in these settings, particularly around elaboration feedback, we thought, hey, this is really interesting, but that you learn something instantly, and you can then. We asked a question on the same topic, and someone can get that right, but what about retention of that material? And so then we looked at can the student, will it stick, essentially? Uh, so we tested folks 2 weeks later and saw some of the same gains. So that was very encouraging. I think the other question we wanted to ask was, if you looked at the multimedia we used in this particular study, it was actually Jose using his iPad to draw some pretty basic, rudimentary, friendly, and accessible little videos. It wasn't a $50,000 Hollywood style studio production. And so that was a really interesting question we pursued too. And I pasted some of this research into the chat and glad to answer questions about that. And we saw because what we were trying to look at there is there a difference then in the learning gains with professional video versus kind of DIY video too. And so what we're starting to find is there's room for both. And I don't know if that's necessarily surprising. It's not necessarily surprising, I don't think, but a lot of universities are spending a lot of money on these things. And if we knew a little bit more about when it was most effective to do that versus when any of us could just shoot something really quick on our device here, then I think that could be a huge time saver, a huge money saver. So that's one of the things that comes in mind. A couple other things, but I know we want to leave time for Q&A too, and I see some really great questions in the chat. So
yeah, thank you, Adam. And I'm going to move to the next slide here just to summarize what we've talked about so far very quickly. We talked about identifying essential course objectives and then choosing the right tool for each job, focusing on what's most important, what do you really want to achieve in the classroom. Second, looking at clear, simple, consistent, and whenever possible, public communication as a time saver for the instructor and as a way to ensure that students can always access that communication and keep it in memory when there's a lot of other things competing for their attention. And finally, building community around the course that is medium agnostic and engages students around the best practices of communities of inquiry, where students are asking their own questions and engaging. And with that, we'll wrap up with one panel question. I'll share a little bit about what PACBEC is, and we'll move over to the presenter questions that have come up, and we'll frame them up to the panel. So as this last conclusion here, Jose, if you want to start, if you think about what online learning could bring to us in the near future, what are some things that you hope that professors do to ensure that every student is prepared to succeed in this summer, fall, and beyond?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Probably difficult to answer, but I think it may be worth it for me to stress on on what I have talked about before and some of what Adam mentioned, and it's the idea that the one of the main benefits of online learning is that it allows the instructor to be more democratic, and we all know that students learn differently. I mean, we don't really know exactly how different it is, right? There have been a lot of approach of kind of getting the learning styles, and I think some of that research is a little bit conflicting because we don't really know whether it's been validate the learning styles we have, but we do have the conceptual idea that students are different, and I think one of the major benefits that the machine allows us to do is that it allows us to capitalize on those differences by allowing students to get the type of instruction that they need. So some students that need less interaction with the content to master a topic go through a material pretty generally fast and are ready for a different type of instruction. And other students that need more practice can actually get that practice. So why would I like to see? And I think, in the future, how would I know that's working? I think I go back to Bloom. I think he mentioned the bell curve. And I think what the point he was making as a bell curve is essentially a result of our limited technology that we had in the 60s and up to the 70s and 80s of providing that kind of mastery at scale. And now that we don't have those constraints, I think there's going to be a change on that bell curve. And I think the bell curve is now going to be, instead of having grades on the horizontal axis, what you will have is time. And some students take 1 month, other students take 2 months, and other students take 3 months, but all of them actually meet the threshold. So I think that's what I see in the future, in 15 to 20 years, that we move from performance scales to more completion and mastery type of scales.
Yeah, thank you, Jose. And what would you add to that, Adam? I know we talked a little bit in preparation for this around your thoughts around the accessibility and the inclusion that this potentially could bring to the education space. Do you mind adding a few of your thoughts there?
Sure. We take that really seriously. When I came down here, we installed a whole compliance team that deals with accessibility. We do it proactively, copyright compliance, and the like. And I think that that's something that if it hasn't already been part of the standard package, it needs to now. especially with all the stuff going online. We and I'll paste this in the chat. We have a something that we adapted from our work at University of Illinois, actually, called Course in a Box, and we brought that and kind of enhanced it at University of North Texas. And this is a short training that really covers the main and the plain, the need to know stuff for faculty. And when you pass the 3 module, it unlocks a Canvas shell that's already templatized for accessibility, because there's as we continue to build more and more of this, it's difficult to scale without some autonomy and so we've tried to build some of this in. So we're taking as many faculty through this. Before, it was just an opportunity for faculty that we couldn't do in the full development, but now we're doing it with as many faculty who will be teaching remote or online as we move into the fall. In fact, we roll it out to everyone in all faculty who are teaching this summer. Yeah. And so I think I hope that it's a core part of what we do, along with some of the things we covered about the digital first and simplicity. I think being proactive for our students with disabilities, understanding that we have students who aren't always English first is really, really important, and to do that proactively at the beginning of the design.
Yeah, and I think the important thing here is that there is an awful lot to think about when we are thinking about the summer and the fall semester. There's an awful lot for instructors to hold in mind, to plan for, and tools like that help someone adapt and build an accessible course, or that help to implement online discussion like what PACBEC does, can be really helpful to outsource some of the pieces, because there really is too much for any one instructor to think about all at the same time as we're thinking about building for best practices. So thank you both for that wrap up. I'm going to share a little bit about PACBEC, and then we will take a couple of the questions from the panel chat as well. So as I mentioned at the beginning, PACBEC offers inquiry-based online discussion for online and face-to-face courses. The thing that's a little bit different about PACBEC than the courses that you might have used in LMS discussion or alternatives in the past is that our platform helps to support master learning through coaching feedback in the platform and auto moderation of the platform. So if a student's post does not meet course standards, if it's plagiarized, or if it contains profanity, or if it is close-ended and therefore not suitable to being discussed by their peers, the platform will auto moderate it, give the student coaching feedback, and give them the chance to revise their post, which can really help to save instructors time and moderation, let the students have more control, and the students then have the benefit not only of engaging in a community, but also in the process of forming questions, which can help them retain the material they're learning in class. And as Jose said, we've been working together for almost 5 years. If you have any comments you wanted to add here about how you've seen the platform change over those 5 years, it's kind of a funny opportunity to be able to have this conversation at the end of all those years of working together. So.
Yeah, I mean, I have used PACBEC in many different ways. I'm not sure. I think you guys will really spare some of the ideas I suggested, but I mean, I definitely I don't think I tried to. My intention was not to try to break it, but I was kind of trying to find. I was so I would say pleasantly surprised at the approach you guys were taking at using AI that I had never seen before. That was not the traditional, trying to students answer multiple choice and they get, feedback that way. Adaptive learning is kind of the way you guys were using AI to provide feedback to essay questions in a mastery way, and I think it was so innovative that I really tried to use it in many different ways. Posting my questions, the students bringing their computers and posting the questions and back in the class. And I think if anything, I think what it demonstrated is how nimble your platform is at doing different things. And I've always been very grateful of you guys being able to integrate my feedback in some of the ways you have developed features. I think that's really important for startup like yours that is trying to to kind of get your message across, is to kind of make sure that the faculty that the platform is developed from the ground up. And I think you guys are doing a great job at that. Moving in small increments, doing a few things really well. Even the very simple protocol of students submitting an essay, and you guys having an automated way of contacting a student that doesn't meet that criteria by an email with a kind of a template text, is a student receiving a text from someone on the work they did on the question and allowing the chance to resubmit. It's an amazing motivator for a student. So.
Well, thank you so much, Jose, and it's really exciting to hear you talk about your excitement around seeing your feedback integrated. We've definitely built the platform, seeing what's working in classrooms and seeing what's working for instructors based on their feedback. So I'm really, really happy to hear that. And I'll leave this slide up if anyone would like to see PackBack. Feel free to go to packback.co/demo, or you can send us an email at the email on the screen there. But I'm going to pull up. I think we'll be able to get to two of our audience questions. One that came from the audience was around what are some other ways that you've seen students be able to try and fail and help them learn from their mistakes without having to set up a ton of additional grading for yourself? And I think that was initially directed at Jose, but if either of you would like to contribute to that one, I'd love to hear your answers.
Well, could you repeat the question, Jess?
So this was an audience question around what are some other ways that you've allowed students to try and fail in the class so that they can learn from their mistakes without adding a ton of grading work to your plate?
Right. So one of the ideas is that you kind of set a standard, and you don't worry so much about actually giving the student a number, right? So if the student is submitting work, and then you actually give the work back to the student with marks on the work that don't have to be very comprehensive, but they have to be something. But you don't offer them a mark. You simply say, work on my comments and repost it, or turn it again. Then it opens up the possibility of really scaling a lot of the work you do. So I have my TAs use holistic rubric. I am very much in favor of holistic rubrics that don't really, they're not really difficult. They're just simply 0, 1, 2, and the TAs give either a 1 or a 0, and then do some markings and give it to the students back, and the students submit it back to them. It's amazing how fast my TAs, or even I, can go over essays if you actually have a very holistic way of looking at the work, rather than having to assign an actual number on a scale, 92, 83, 84, and then you have to explain why is it 84 instead of 83, right? So I think that's kind of the best tips I can give you, is to kind of switch to holistic rubrics rather than the structural rubrics that are kind of used sometimes.
Yeah. And I think that touched on one of the other audience questions that came up that I wanted to lay up to both of you as well, around, could either of you speak to administrating effective assessments in an online environment? How do you measure performance well? And I think your comment around holistic assessments on a 0 to 1 scale with multiple chances is a really exciting way to think about that. Adam, have you tried anything to make assessments in an online environment effective?
All kinds of things. I just posted a link on alternative assessments in place of traditional exams that we've been circulating around our campus. There are some, there's a lot of people, this has been true for, honestly, for a couple decades, worried about academic integrity in the online space. And my position has always been that it's not really worse than in face-to-face. It's just that, websites and chat rooms have replaced the fraternity basement. It's like a digital fraternity basement or something like that. And, we always have to be aware of that. So, of course, we do standard things like use things like Respondus Monitor and Lockdown Browser. At Illinois, we use ProctorU. That's actually quite effective in most cases. I think what's a little tougher is some of the assignments in between, like your students posting the answers on a something like Chegg, or there's a million sites for them out there. They're supposed to be for notes, but they really wind up being for exam answers. So we talk to faculty all the time about having larger question banks and rotating those. You can do timed exams. there are a lot of ways. And then you can do, you can consider not doing an exam, papers and projects and group activities. It certainly doesn't always work to just port what you're doing from on the face-to-face to online. But there are a lot of alternatives. I don't know, Jose, if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
No, I not because on interest of time, I definitely agree with you, and I want to reemphasize what you said, that some people may actually it's one that is important, and that is that based on my research and my experience and what I've seen is that the academic integrity problem doesn't increase with online, and that is surprising. It was surprising to me, and it is surprising in general, but I think profound because it really opened up to people really trying these technologies that are so beneficial online, as that they may be hesitant to do because they worry about the issue of academic integrity. We should worry. I mean, academic integrity is important, but not more than we were worrying before, I think.
Right. Agreed.
Well, thank you both again so much for coming today. This was an awesome conversation. I had a lot of fun, and it was really an honor to be able to bring you both together for this conversation. If anyone's interested in further detail around what Adam was just mentioning, he shared a message in the chat at 128, so please do grab that link. We'll also share out and follow up the slides from this deck and the other resources that were shared. And this is a very big topic, one that can't be covered in full and comprehensive detail in an hour, but I hope this was a helpful summary and a helpful starting place. I know Adam and Hosea both offered very generously to be available for conversations and questions. And same goes for our team at Packback. As I said, Mehedi, Ariam, and Ashani were in the chat. I hope they were helpful to everyone in responses. And if you would like to learn more about Packback, or if there's any way that our team can support you, please send us an email at curious@packback.co. Thank you, everyone, so much for coming today. Good luck this summer and good luck this fall.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.